I've lost confidence in politicians.
Sure.
I've not lost confidence in the
country.
people who are working the state, who are deeply capable and technical to turn it around. The problem is not the state, it's not the technocrats, it's the politicians. If you removed the politicians and their meddling, you'd find incredibly capable people who know what they're doing. Let me make this as a controversial statement, and I'll say it to you because you're a brother. If, God forbid, what happened to Keenan Forbes happened during apartheid, and the apartheid government wanted to find the killer, they would have found that killer in 24 hours.
You're joking.
That is a fact, and I know it as much as you do. So, the question for citizens to ask themselves is, how could we have gone from such an incredibly capable state to the state of such incapability? I think that there are incredibly capable, talented people. You'll find them in the public service. You'll find them every day, diligent, doing their job. But I think, like you and me, they are equally frustrated at these forces that come to bear every single day. A public servant has a career, JJ. They have a career. They work 30 years. They accrue a pension. A politician doesn't. And so what you find are people who have a 5-year mandate to accumulate capital, enforcing themselves on people who have a 30-year mandate to build a technical skill. And inevitably, something has to give.
If you're president tomorrow and you had to solve the power crisis, what would you do? The president seems to think he must appoint another minister. You've been observing what's been happening, particularly over the last two years, where the economy is concerned, 2 million jobs, just like that, out. I've just been talking now, 202 days of load shedding. Just give it to me. What do you think is going on? And are we going to get out of this rut?
I think the biggest challenge South Africa is facing, JJ, is that the average South African is too inward focused. We don't have a sense of ourselves in relation to the environment we are in. We are us. Our neighbors in the environment we're operating in have a different approach to things because of their history. And as a consequence, bias. Let me say it simply. The average South African today is too seized with what's happening in South Africa and not enough with what that means for where South Africa places itself in the global context. Now, in the space I move in, the people I deal with, the international community, global investors and capital markets, I can tell you for free that South Africa is just not as significant as we were 10 years ago.
Sure.
That's a painful statement. There are some people who will tweet me and have things to say about it. But tweets don't change facts. These are the facts. I was at the FinTech event at the ADGM in Abu Dhabi 2 years ago. I was there 4 years ago. You could tell a marked difference in where South Africans were placed in a 24-month span.
Sure.
This year, I don't even think some South African counterparts have been invited. These are the facts. And this is in my little space of private equity and venture capital. It's probably much, much broader in other capital market space as well.
What has caused that credibility decline in your view?
A few things. That's a good question. So the first thing is this, right? It's that for whatever reason, we seem intent on destroying ourselves. And I don't know why. It's like a contest. Who can mess up more than who?
Sure.
And that contest is not only amongst leaders, it's amongst society as well.
Sure.
You think about a community that's experiencing a service delivery issue. The contest today is on which community can protest more violently than which community.
Sure.
You can't run a country like this. You can't govern like this, right? In Rwanda, and we have an office in Rwanda. We are partners with one of the institutions, the state institutions in Rwanda. The things that happen here, you wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare. Now you've got to think about what that means. 1994, Utata gets up on stage at the Union Buildings, says never, never, and never again. In the same year, a young man is marching from Uganda through the bush into his native country of Rwanda to claim back his country and rebuild it. Then they'd come out of a genocide where 1 million people were brutally murdered and slaughtered on the streets. You couldn't compare Rwanda to South Africa today. You can now. Then you couldn't compare it. Today you absolutely can. So it's not that South Africa is no longer the leading, dominating force in the continent. It's that the margin in which she holds her power is significantly diminished. You saw this 4 or 5 years ago when Nigeria usurped the size of our economy from a GDP base. You saw it 3 years ago when Morocco, as it was said by RNB in a paper they published, had a capital market system that was as sophisticated, not as deep, the qualification is important, as sophisticated as ours. Then you saw it a year later when a number of South Africans were migrating to Mauritius to access those capital markets. When you are number one, guys, you have a target painted on your back. Everybody wants your position. And it appears to me South Africans don't understand that. You don't understand who you are number one. So everybody's template is you. So siyalwa angazi silwelani. It's a contest ukuthi ubani ungabanga umsindo ukudlula omunye, ubani ungashout ukudlula omunye. You were talking about this Andre issue. Fascinating. I'm watching this thing like a movie. You know, it's just fascinating to me. And here's the reason it's fascinating. There are people today who are saying Andre de Ruyter must go and open a case.
And tell them who is stealing.
Just help me understand this, because I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm a simple man. Small little township at Binoni. Pumange N12, Uti East, Uzoitola, la Isaiti. Tiny little place. Went to a small little school called Egukanyen. I'm a simple guy. So here's my simple man understanding. In this country, a few years ago, the #1 soccer player was murdered. We still don't know who did it. In this country,
8 years later,
2 weeks later, 2 weeks ago, the #1 hip-hop artist is murdered. There's a video of it. Everybody can watch it. No suspect has been arrested. Nobody knows what's going on. So how about Andre de Ruyter must go in the report? My father was murdered in 1998. The docket was lost twice. There were eyewitnesses. The guy who stood is still walking the streets. So mabati magayo report. You must ask these questions. And it's the reason I'm saying this is very simple. Here's the nub of the point. South Africans today are just too obsessed with the theater. The film, the movies, the drama. The young man who was a protester, saw a video of his trending where he says South Africa is a drama, it's a series. This is what he meant. You're too obsessed with the theater. You're too obsessed with the press statement and who's standing where and who's saying what. It's Andre de Ruyter today, and in 2 weeks' time you will have forgotten, and it'll be the next person. In the meantime, Namibia is busy developing its hydrogen energy platform. Last week, the First Lady of the USA was in Namibia. She didn't come here. I was in Namibia a week ago. The investors are flocking into Windhoek. In the meantime, Mauritius is no longer on the grey list. Capital that was meant for the JSE is now going towards Mauritius. In the meantime. So in the meantime, whilst we are busy with the theater, the rest of the world is moving on. 10 years ago, in my world, venture capital, we had 1 unicorn in all of Africa. Today, I think we're sitting on about 5 or 6. They are not South African. It's the Nigerians.
And on top of that, we are grey listed. What does it mean in simple terms?
Quite simply, it means that the cost of doing business with South Africa, not in South Africa, with South Africa, is now higher. So when you're global financial institutions and you're looking at allocating mass capital into the South African financial system, the cost is higher, right? Now, so we're grey listed, it's done.
Yeah.
This process started, I think the peer review process, the evaluation process started in 2019.
Yeah.
This has been some time coming, right? And it'll take, as per the statement by Treasury, they say between 1 and 3 years. I think that's conservative. They've given themselves this target of January 2025
Yeah.
to get us off this grey listing.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, now that we're on it, it's going to make our ability to attract capital into our economy that much harder. We're busy raising capital right now. So we're dealing with large institutional investors in Europe and all over the world. Now it's coming up in the DD process.
Yeah.
Now, when you're doing a due diligence with them, this is a question that's being asked. And to be clear,
Which means we're now going to be more scrutinized
Absolutely.
before you are actually granted those opportunities abroad. I want you to zone into that after the break to say, would this have implications for the path that we have set ourselves in terms of the Africa free trade?
Sure.
Or within the context of Africa, it may not be that significant. The president seems to think, oh, well, this will help us to improve. I mean, this is the best shot at the response to this. Does this grey listing, right, in your view, would it affect our ambitions around Africa trade? I mean, the intra-African trade is so poor. It's not even worth mentioning. I mean, some 13% as opposed to Europe's 69% or something, and a different percentage in Americas, which is equally high. You know, what do you think about that?
It's a hard question because there are sides to that coin. So first, the intra-Africa conversation is one about African economies facilitating opportunities for trade amongst themselves. The grey listing of South Africa is done by the task force, which is a global body, right? So there is, although subtle, a distance between those two things.
Yeah.
The first is, that's the first. The second point to consider is that the phenomenal work that's been done by the good people at Afrexim Bank, right, which is the African bank meant to deal with imports and export across the continent, I expect will soften a little bit of the blow that we would have experienced where we would have needed capital coming from other parts of the world to help us facilitate that trade. Look, no doubt it will have an implication in terms of how Treasury runs its balance sheet. And there are phenomenal people at Treasury who are probably seized with this right now. But I think the biggest issue with it is the fact that we're talking about it. The biggest issue with this grey listing is what it means on PR. That's what it means.
And positioning the country abroad as an destination. And that is interesting because part of what Ramaphosa's administration has tried to focus on is bringing investors here. So and they're talking about billions and many projects that are now maturing, etc.
I was on a call today.
It's a bad timing. It's a bad timing.
No, it's terrible. Look, I was on a call today with a group of family offices who are Emirati based in the Middle East. And we've been talking to them to give us some capital for a mid-market fund that we're raising. And this was the third conversation. And today it came up. And the tone of the meeting was markedly different.
Sure.
Now, what it means for us, and we're a small speck in a much bigger financial services system of South Africa, but what it means for us is that resistance is now a resistance that pushes out our timeline 3, maybe 6 months between now and when we get to deploy capital. What that means ultimately is that our ability to bring capital into the country, invest it into the real economy, get entrepreneurs building, creating jobs and get this economy working again, that process slows down. So the point is this, to your point when you were talking about where the economy was in this 0% aggregate growth rate right over the past 10 years, this is just resistance we don't need. That's what it is. It's resistance we don't need.
Absolutely. The minister in the presidency was my guest last week, Monday, was quick to read. Was quick to read me an extract from a business day saying business is so happy the president is going to appoint a minister of electricity. We're still waiting who that is. God bless that person. But anyway, he was saying actually business is saying this is a good sign in terms of projections for the future and so on. Is that your impression as you scour the world and listen to how people are interpreting the fact that we can hardly keep our lights on? And the same people are expected to come here and invest in businesses that actually need energy.
Here's the painful answer to that question, right? The painful answer to that question is we are introducing barriers to our growth that we haven't proven ourselves capable of managing. Let me say that in another way. Load shedding and power cuts is part of the course if you do business in Nigeria. There are parts of West Africa where you just have to worry about how do you provide your own power. I'm talking from experience. I've seen it. I've been there, right? The difference with us is that these things were given as a given when you invest and do business.
Yeah.
Now that they're not, the question is not whether or not we will address them. The question is, can we operate under these stresses? Because we haven't proven that we can. That's the question. So the fundamental question the international community is asking ourselves, they're going, okay, so we've seen South Africa grow at 4-5% growth rate with consistent supply of electricity. Can she hit 4-5% growth rate
with no electricity?
With no consistent supply of electricity?
Yeah.
That's the question. Whereas if you're Nigeria, that's not a question because you've proven you can.
Yeah.
Right? If you are DRC, that's not a question. You've proven you can. For us, the question is, can you hit the same growth numbers, given that the benchmark for us, given the size of our economy is so much larger, right? Can you hit the same growth numbers with these new introduced constraints? Just think about the past 5 years and the number of constraints we have introduced ourselves. Just the load shedding, then the mess. You remember there was a video of mine that trended that got me all sorts of nonsense and threats. The mess of how we handled lockdowns. It was unbelievable. We have not to say okay.
What can we do today?
You understand? And I must confess, when we started this, you said I've been lying low. It's not that I'm lying low. It's that I came to realize that if it was a mathematical equation, the return for criticism is zero.
You're joking.
You can criticize all you want. They're not listening. I have sat in business class in planes, flying international haulage, with a minister next to me. And please don't underrate me after this. And they will tell you, no, siyayizwa lento eshoyo. And then nothing changes.
Nothing happens. How big an issue is corruption? Because the reality is corruption is everywhere, right?
Yes.
In all jurisdictions, there'll always be the stint of corruption. In other places, they've excelled it in way more than we can ever dream of. But after spending 3 years, literally washing our dirty linens for everyone to see and spend R1 billion to do that. And then a year later, we haven't done anything about what came out of. How does that stack up in our imaging abroad?
Again, exactly. It's a peer. And there are people who watch this and go, who cares what the global community thinks? You can't run an economy in today's world. The world is flat today. Something happens in Moscow, 20 minutes later, you're finding out about it on your phone. The world is flat, right? So the PR and what the world thinks of us is fundamental. I think, actually, JJ, I think most people have mischaracterized the true cost of corruption. I don't think the true cost of corruption, rather, let me say it differently. I don't think the most expensive line item in the cost of corruption, right, is what it's done to the economy. I think it's what it's done to sentiment and what it does to talent. In other words, when you corrupt a system, those less deserving get opportunities to which they are not deserving.
Entitled.
The problem is that those who are deserving pick up a little green document called a passport. They get on a plane
and go elsewhere.
And they leave. Now, there are some people watching this who go, no, they must go. Let me tell you why that is the dumbest, most nonsensical thing I've ever heard people say. When you say, JJ must go, JJ is born in South Africa. The South African state educates him for 18 years to get his matric. Then that same South African economy has built institutions of education. Let's assume JJ gets a master's. It's another 5-6 years of it. 24 years invested, and you're going to say he must just go.
Because you must just flushing that investment down the drain.
And so, what's happened now, if it's not the semigration to the Western Cape, that's a separate conversation altogether. It's the proper immigration. The number of South Africans who have sat in this chair living in Canada today would alarm you. The number who've moved to Australia would alarm you. The number I bump into, or neighbors of mine in the Middle East, will alarm you, right? Because what talent does, when you distort this thing about effort versus reward, is talent goes where it will be rewarded.
My goodness.
It doesn't have to put up with the nonsense. It gets on a plane and it leaves.
Yeah.
Now,
The rate they're saying is going overseas.
That's my own. But I think the point is this:
Yeah.
the degradation is slow, right? So
Yeah.
you don't feel it immediately.
Yeah.
But trust me, let me end it by saying this. If you looked at the top 100 investment bankers in Wall Street today, you'd find a healthy percentage of them are Nigerians. The top brain surgeons in the world today, healthy percentage of them, Nigerians. The top investment banking lawyers in the world today, healthy percentage of them, Nigerians.
Sure.
What does that tell you? How is it that Nigeria is struggling with the issues it's struggling with, but some of the smartest people in the world are Nigerians? And then you look at where you'll find those Nigerians, and typically it's not in Nigeria. It means you've got this incredible base of talent whose skills, competence, and abilities are being harvested by another economy and not their economy of birth.
Sure.
So I want to say this to all South Africans. If you want to destroy this economy, let the talent leave. And mask it as whatever you want. No, let
Yeah.
talent leave.
There used to be a big debate about brain drain.
Yes.
It just stopped. We almost stopped talking about it. And would this mean that we have come to accept that
Yes.
people are going to leave?
Yes.
And in fact, some of them believe that it's better to leave and then just view things from abroad. They will come back maybe when the circus has passed down.
Sure. I mean, I must be careful how I phrase this, but I have a lot of respect for Ndate Kiswater at the receiver.
Yeah.
You would have seen the changes that they have made.
Yeah.
Today, if you're leaving South Africa, you can't just, financially immigrate. There's now a period that they've introduced. My understanding is this 36-month period. You can't just say, I'm leaving today, shut your account and go open a new account.
Yeah.
Because they themselves have recognized that there was a massive exodus.
Yeah.
Somebody should run a mathematical simulation to show what would have happened to the South African economy if we didn't have exchange controls and how much capital would have left the country. Right.
Well, isn't it part of the grey listing actually that we are very loose
we're
when
loose
it
on
comes
this,
to illicit financial?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little about that in linking it to the budget. Do you think, right, and I'm sure you have sort of listened with one ear about what's new in the budget, right?
Sure.
Has it been used as an instrument for growth?
Sure.
Or is it a sort of a maintenance budget where we just say, well, let's just keep our heads above? Like a lot of business have responded almost positively to it, to say it's a good balancing act, the usual sort of rhetoric. What's your view?
Yeah, so our research team at My Growth Fund published a A4 summary of the budget.
Yeah.
And I had a chat with Michael who had worked on it. And look, the budget is the best that can be done given the constraints that we face.
Yeah.
It's not it's not a super phenomenal growth budget, but it is a steady she goes, let's be prudent and let's do the things we need to do budget. The increase in the limits where they needed to be, the concessions that were made in terms of some of the tax rates, all of that's the stuff that needs to get done.
Yeah.
But I think South Africa's past budgets as fixing the problems of South Africa.
Yeah.
We don't have a budget issue. In the same way we don't have a revenue collection issue. Right. In other words, let me say it to you another way. We're phenomenal at collecting revenues. We're great at allocating where those revenues go. SARS, Treasury. Where we're poor is in making sure that to which we have allocated, we enjoy the true fruits of. That's where the corruption is sitting. So perhaps we have a state of the nation, we have a budget speech. Perhaps we need to have a state of the corruption. And you need to look at and assess each and every single department.
State of the corruption.
I think so, because that's where the problem is, JJ. The real problem is what's happening at local government. The real problem is at a municipal level. That's where the real
Trevor
problem is.
Manuel, we did some phenomenal things that saw our economy grow, that saw us reap the rewards of having been prudent in the early years. In other words, then we are able to then actually take that money and spend it on schools, on clinics, on things that are going to uplift people's lives. What can we learn from that era of Trevor Manuel? Fast forward to today, that is not happening.
The point you make is a good one, actually. And here, I suppose, is the sub-question you're asking, which is there enough creative thinking going into how do we construct a budget for a country such as ours, given the constraints that we have? You could argue that there isn't, or you could argue that there's a steady she goes, these are the things we need to do, because the constraints are very, very real. I do think, though, that there's a trick. And this is like a wild idea. If I had the power to, here's what I would do. I would say to each and every single South African living somewhere else in the world, that if you come back into South Africa, every single dollar of capital you bring back and invest, we will give you 5 years tax-free. No capital gains, nothing. Bring your money back into the country and invest.
Yeah.
You would see a flurry of capital coming back into the country, right? And so, one of the things that Emmanuel was able to do was to elucidate around that kind of creative thinking. It wasn't a, these are the resources, this is what we're going to do. It was also a, these are some of the creative measures we're going to put in place. Some years ago.
To attract investments, to get people to be invested. Because at the moment, is it a rumor or fact that actually business is sitting on capital and they're not investing it? They're just watching where the sectors is going.
That is probably the number one landmine you can ever get in, right? Because I've heard that statement said so many times. I even know analysts who've gone and quantified the number. And then I know financial services analysts and research companies that have come out and gone, no, that's just not true.
There's no cash pile of investment that could only be triggered by political stability.
It doesn't take a lot to calculate that number. Just go to the JSE top 40, go to the balance sheet of those companies,
reports,
and then have a look at how much capital they're sitting on, right? And you could probably arrive at a reasonable number. But again, symptom, not cause. If business is sitting on money, and I say if because I don't know for certain. If business is sitting on money, that's the symptom. What's the cause? If the economy is not growing, symptom, not cause. If there's load shedding, symptom, not cause. If there's strikes at university, symptom, not cause. If there's potholes down the street, symptom, not cause. If there's dirty water coming out of your tap, symptom, not cause. South Africans have to get beyond worrying about the symptoms.
The symptoms,
Andre de Ruyter is a symptom. He's not a cause.
So what is the cause of all our trouble?
You answer that, Mre.
No, what is it? What is it? In summary, what is it?
It's the citizen.
What can unlock? Is it the citizen?
It is the citizen who refuses to understand how much power they have. It's the citizen who's willing to give away their power for a t-shirt and a concert and a food hamper. That is the cause. So
are you basically saying the joke is on us?
I'm not even saying the joke is on you. I'm saying the joke is you. I'm saying if South Africa was a joke, the citizen is the punchline. Someone's going to tweet that. But that's the joke is us. It's not on us. It is us. It's the fact that we continue to think the system is going to change when we follow the same rules and we play by the same category of games.
Have you lost confidence in our government? I want to put it bluntly. Have you lost confidence? You have seen it all. It's 30 years now. There's no more research ingredients you need. It's 30 years of a demonstration of whether or not we can govern ourselves effectively.
I've lost confidence in politicians. I've not lost confidence in the people who are working the state, who are deeply capable and technical to turn it around. The problem is not the state, it's not the technocrats, it's the politicians. If you removed the politicians and their meddling, you'd find incredibly capable people who know what they're doing. Let me make this as a controversial statement, and I'll say it to you because you're a brother. If, God forbid, what happened to Keenan Forbes happened during apartheid, and the apartheid government wanted to find the killer, they would have found that killer in 24 hours.
You're joking.
That is a fact, and I know it as much as you do. So, the question for citizens to ask themselves is how could we have gone from such an incredibly capable state to the state of such incapability? I think that there are incredibly capable, talented people. You'll find them in the public service. You'll find them every day, diligent, doing their job. But I think like you and me, they are equally frustrated at these forces that come to bear every single day. A public servant has a career, JJ. They have a career. They work 30 years. They accrue a pension. A politician doesn't. And so what you find are people who have a 5-year mandate to accumulate capital, enforcing themselves on people who have a 30-year mandate to build a technical skill. And inevitably, something has to give.
If you're president tomorrow and you had to solve the power crisis, what would you do? The president seems to think he must appoint another minister. And that minister will crack the whip and make decisions, and we'll all be back to stage 1 or 0 of load shedding. What would you do?
It's a deeply technical question. It's a hard question. I think some of the things he's done are the right thing already. I think declaring a state of emergency gives him more power to do the things he needs to do.
Yeah.
I think this idea around breaking ESCOM up is not necessarily a bad idea. But I don't think it's a board issue. It's not a board issue. When an airline doesn't make money, you don't say hire a pilot, right? When a tax authority doesn't make money, you don't say hire an accountant.
Yeah.
So why is it that when the power utility is not providing power, people say hire an engineer? If you need an engineer at the head of an institution like ESCOM, that means there is something wrong with the technical skill in the organization. You need a leader.
You need a leader, yeah.
And you need a leader who's willing to lead, willing to make tough decisions, willing to be unpopular. So what would I do? I would scour the world and I would find the person who will make an enemy out of everybody, but most importantly, will make an enemy out of the politicians, who will protect the citizens, who will do the hard things, be honest with us, and will turn the situation around.
But you really think politicians can be hands-off in something as central to the economy as ESCOM? Because Andre de Ruyter tells us, and on this particular one, we've got no reason to disbelieve him, that there was almost micromanagement of ESCOM.
Yes.
In other words, now when we have to blame that the things have fallen apart, the politicians cannot wash their hands.
Yes.
Because they were there trying to cook, to be part of the cook.
Well, I mean, the great thing is that it's only a question of time. I think over the next election, the power dynamics in the political parties in South Africa will shift. I don't believe you'll get a party that has an outright majority, whichever party that might be.
Yes.
And I think that that type of government will change how power is exercised, first. Second, it's ironic, but the more in financial trouble ESCOM is, the more power financial markets have to bear on ESCOM, because they're providing capital to keep this thing running. And I think that those dynamics will eventually come to bear in terms of how ESCOM itself is managed and who the right person is. What is absolutely central to this whole thing is quite simply this. People who do not have the responsibility should not be given the opportunity to meddle in things. That's how we get into trouble. So the separation of state, the segregation of power, this concurrent system of governance we run is fundamental. The first thing you do in business, JJ, when you want to have governance is segregation of duties. The person issuing the invoice can't be the person collecting the money.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, man. There's never enough time to talk to you about many things.
My problem with you is you always ask me questions that are so flammable. And then I